Hello, hello. We are live today on our special time. We have a special time because our guest is on the West Coast and we didn't want her to have to, take the call in bed. Wake up and take the call. So thank you for joining us, Leslie, Priscilla. We appreciate you.
Thank you, Tamara.
She's the founder of Latinx Parents, and she's going to talk to us today about reparenting your inner teen. Before we get to that, I want to remind you that please, this is a dialogue with you and Leslie, so please put your comments or questions in the comment section. I will be looking for those, and she will address them live on air. Welcome, Leslie.
Thank you. I'm really, really excited to be here.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about Latinx Parenting to begin?
Yeah. So, like you said, my name is Leslie Priscilla. I am first and foremost a mother. I have 3 young children. My daughter is about to turn 10, and then I have 2 younger ones who are 4 and 2.5. He'll be 3 this year. And I founded Latinx Parenting, honestly, out of like a frustration that I had with the parenting world being very Eurocentric, not really taking cultural values into consideration, not really understanding what it is that people like my mom needed, right? So I'm like thinking about my mom reading one of these parenting books. I'm like, that would not apply to her situation, right? And there's still a lot of people that don't feel very seen in the parenting world, just with regards to their personal challenges, which a lot of which stem from cultural challenges. And so Latinx Parenting was really born out of that fire, out of that frustration, out of me really wanting to be myself, and then others like me wanting to feel some level of representation.
Thank you for doing that. Tell us, let's start by defining inner teen. What is an inner teen? And I want to remind people that when you put your comments in the section, because this is, in our basement kind of operation. In the past, if we've had tech issues, people have put them in the chat and we've been able to fix that. So don't shy away from that, okay? Now, why don't you tell us a little bit about what an inner teen is?
I think a lot of people have heard about the inner child, and I think that's a conversation that's very important and that's been going around a lot. And I think what people don't realize sometimes is that there's different stages, just like in childhood, right? Child development has different stages. You're not always going to look at the brain or look at, that stage of development stuck on an age. And so we look at the inner teen very much like we look at the inner child, but the inner teen has its own challenges, right? And certain things that the inner teen experienced will make itself known to us in very different ways than our inner child. So our inner child, for example, if we have the resistance around crying, or we are uncomfortable when our children cry, that's very much, a representation of our inner child not being allowed to cry when they were little, right? And so around toddlerhood, 5, 6, like that's when we heard, stop crying. There's nothing to cry about. There's nothing to feel sad about, etc. And so we can kind of start to discern who is coming up for us based on what emotion and what sensations are coming up for us. And so you and I talked a little bit before this, and I said, my inner teen really makes itself known when I'm experiencing similar emotions and similar behaviors as I did when I was a teenager, right? And so that might feel a little bit confusing because, it feels intense. It feels like, oh my gosh, this anger is coming up, this indignation is coming up. Where is this coming from? And so when that comes up for me, I can only speak for myself, right? I know that that's my inner teen. And so my inner teen is somebody who values autonomy, the ability to make decisions on her own, wants to differentiate herself and her identity from other people or from people who she considers, authority figures, et cetera. So all of these little aspects around teenagers and the challenges that they go through, we still experience that on an emotional and somatic, which means body level, when we are experiencing our inner teen come to the surface. Uh-oh, I can't hear you, Kamaya. I think you're muted.
I'm sorry. I love the way that you define that, because what you've defined is the classic definition of a teenager. Mm-hmm. And for those who are listening to you, some of us are going, oh, we're supposed to be talking about our teens, but you described a teen.
Yeah.
And our inner teen is important when we are parenting other teenagers.
Yes.
Because as you said, some of these same issues and responses to issues come to the surface.
Yes, exactly. And so when we do inner child work or inner adolescent, what I would call my inner adolescent or inner teen, that is when we are going to feel the most activation. Is when somebody else in that same life stage is presenting those same challenges that we had, and so that is where a lot of the confusion comes up. So, I don't have a teenager currently, but I did grow up 10 years older than my little sister. And so when she was a teenager and I was in my later 20s, I started feeling my inner teen get really activated by some of the behaviors that she was experiencing. And so I actually see it as an opportunity, and I see every interaction that we have with our children as an opportunity for us to heal certain wounds that have gone unaddressed. And so something that we might experience when we are raising teens specifically is just a lot of not knowing how, right? Like, I don't know how to deal with this. My parents didn't really deal with it very well. If it's okay to disclose a little bit, when I was a teen, I engaged in self-harm. I engaged in promiscuity. I engaged in a lot of risk-taking behaviors. And I didn't really have the guidance to be able to tell me that I didn't necessarily need to, have all of those experiences. That is really what was filling a hole for me. And so when my children are presenting me with these challenges, I can really see it as an opportunity for me to experience a level of healing that maybe I haven't experienced before.
Wonderful. I love that setup. You said that when we're talking about our inner teen, it usually presents itself when we are parenting or around other teens, so same stage of life. I really like that. Let's talk about reparenting. What is reparenting? Because our topic is reparenting the inner teen. You know what the inner teen is now. What is reparenting?
So reparenting, and I think a lot of people think like, well, I was already parented. Like, why would I need to reparent myself if I was already parented? Because so many of us experienced a lack of conscious awareness from our parents, right? Awareness or the even just awareness of like what we were going through developmentally. Like, our parents didn't really have access to the resources around child development, around what was happening in the brain. Now we have, like, Dan Siegel wrote this beautiful book called Brainstorm around the teenage years, and my parents didn't have that. And even if they had it, they probably wouldn't have read it because they were so busy. And so what it is the acknowledgement that there are parts of ourselves that are still very much wanting to be seen, wanting to be acknowledged, wanting to be validated. And so me as the inner mother or the inner father, if you identify as a father, and even if you don't, it really is anybody just taking ownership of that relationship and saying, no, I'm actually going to tend to my inner child's needs, to my inner teen's needs at this point in time. And that is going to produce a level of connection to myself, a level of, security in my identity that maybe I wasn't able to access when I was growing up. And so it's not a diss on our parents at all. It's not, you are the worst because you didn't provide me with all of these needs. I find it really liberating to be able to reparent myself because it means that it's in my hands, right? It means that the relationship that I have to myself, the relationship that I have to my healing is something that I can handle. And sometimes I can't handle it alone. And this is why it's so important to gain community around these topics and around these things. But it really is an empowering thing to be able to reparent ourselves and to, really think about the ways that we can still meet that inner child, that inner teen's needs. And one of the biggest things about it is the discernment piece. We have to be able to discern what it is that our inner teen is needing versus what our inner teen is wanting. So my inner teen might want to slam the door on my partner when I'm angry. That's just what my inner teen might want. But the inner parent then comes in and tries to soothe that anger, tries to acknowledge and to give context for what's happening, and guidance and validation and all of those things. And so while I may want to slam that door, my inner parent comes in and says, you know what, there's better ways of handling this. I got you. You are safe. The things that you're experiencing are normal. Maybe you just need to take space in a different way without externalizing that. And so a lot of us as teens either externalized a lot of the emotions that were going, unchecked or unprocessed, or we internalize them. And so that goes into thinking about how we think about ourselves. One of the examples that I can give from my life is when I was a young teen, my mom really wanted the house to be clean all the time, just like make sure that the house stays clean. Like that was the biggest priority. Now I'm like realizing that it was very much about control and feeling, really like you were in control of your environment. And I get that now as a parent. And at the same time, it didn't really give me an opportunity to rest, right? Like I was always seen as somebody who was lazy, or, if I was lounging around, it was like, you're useless, you're wasting your time, etc. And so now I really have to grapple with that, where I take rest days, or I have like a couch here, and I'm like, sometimes I'll lay on the couch and I have to notice, oh my gosh, I'm starting to tell myself that I'm lazy, that I'm useless, that I'm not doing enough. And so those are the internalizing behaviors, right? Whereas if I had externalized a lot of that and I would say, no, I'm not lazy, and I'm all like that, probably would have produced a level of further disconnection from my mom, right? Like further, she was a yeller, she definitely said some things that when she was in her low brain and she was in her survival mode, she probably wouldn't have said if she was, rested and fed and all of these, things that are required of us in order to be able to be the kind of parents we want to be. But it still created harm. It still caused a certain level of damage that I've been trying to repair in myself with this reparenting practice.
So now we know what reparenting is, and we know what our inner teen is. Can you give us a reparenting your inner teen 101? What is it? We're all in now. What do we need to be doing?
So one of the things that I really suggest to people, and this is one of the primary tenets of the reparenting course that I teach. So it's not just focused on that young child; it's focused on the spectrum of when we were children, right? And actually, it goes into early 20s as well, because a lot of us are still very much in the adolescent brain. And so one of the things that I highly suggest to people is to have a picture of yourself, have some kind of representation of yourself as an inner teen somewhere where you can see it. So you can put a picture of yourself on your mirror. You can put a picture, you could just set it as your home screen. I happen to have an inner niña, what I call my inner niña, my inner child, altar. And so that has certain representations of what I loved as a child. So I loved horses. There's, an aspect of horses there. As a teen, there's certain things that we can do to reconnect with that part of ourselves. What music did you like to listen to when you were a teenager? What movies did you like to listen to or watch when you were a teenager? And so a lot of my healing has been to go back to those things and to really think about how those things served me. I talked to my partner recently, and I was like, I really feel like certain musicians, music especially, is so powerful. Certain musicians really saved my life during those years, really made me feel connected to something bigger than myself. And that was kind of how I was, trudging along and really trying to survive those years. And so honoring that process, honoring the inner teen by honoring what she had to do to survive, and reconnecting with those things. And now not from a place of survival, but from a place of appreciation and wanting to thrive. And so those little emblems have become really important for me. To reconnect to. And so one of the things that I do is, I'll turn up what was Kimya Dawson. I don't know if you're familiar with Kimya Dawson or Alanis, and I'll just feel into how she felt, just feel into those memories, and those memories can come back, and those memories can sometimes produce tears, and that's good. We want to be able to still cry, because our inner teen often did not have the space to cry. Felt like they had to be really strong, felt like they had to be really, tough this out, and again, internalize a lot of those things. And so when we can reconnect to those items or those songs or those movies or those pictures of ourselves, then we can really do it from a place of wanting to release, wanting to release a lot of the weight, a lot of the shame, a lot of the just heaviness that we carried around as teenagers.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is we're not fixing things that happen in our teen, but we're going back and we're finding those good things, those things that soothed us, and we're placing them in our adulthood. Is that correct?
That's part of it. And so there is another part, and that goes back to what I was saying earlier around identifying what wounds are rising to the surface that stem from that adolescent age, right? And so if I am feeling really angry, if I am feeling really vindictive, or I want to slam that door at my partner, right? That is something that maybe I feel like, we haven't totally processed that, right? We haven't totally processed that anger. We haven't totally processed the behaviors that stem from that anger. And so I'm a big practicer of nonviolent communication. And so my framework really is, behavior is always a signal to feelings and needs that are underneath. And so for us, as we reparent that inner teen, we really have to think about what needs are not getting met in that moment. Is it my need for autonomy? Is it my need for understanding? You know, am I getting triggered? Am I getting activated because this is reminding me of a similar emotion that I went through in my adolescence that maybe I have not really fully processed because it's been scary, because I haven't had, you know, the time or the space to be able to do that. And so I really see it as an invitation to be able to do that deeper work of investigating what is at the root, what is at the core, and what is the core need.
So now I hear you clear now. So what we're really doing is we're going back and we're saying we're having a chance to almost analyze our own adolescence, especially those parts that are appearing currently in our adulthood, whether it's positive or negative, and how we can use the positive, how we can reframe the negative and not fall back into whatever the negative was, but understand why it was.
Yes, yes. So we're really giving context to those experiences, right? So now we are adults. Now we can really understand what is happening. And sometimes we can't understand it at a cognitive level, right? We can't understand it at a head level, especially those of us that experience trauma in adolescence. Sometimes our body survives by not allowing us to remember those things, right? And so some things that may be coming to the surface may actually not be something that we want to deal with at a cognitive level because we'll get frustrated, right? We want to also deal with it at the body level. So what is occurring, what is arising in my body? Where's the tension that I'm experiencing, this emotion? And how can I breathe into that, right? How can I incorporate practices that really allow me to release that in a productive way? And what are some of the things that I can do and implement, you know, that are concrete, right? So a lot of people think that this reparenting thing is like, it's very woo-woo, it's very, you know, oh, just validate, just, you know, name the feelings, etc. Like very similar to the way that people think about conscious parenting, but it's concrete things. And so I actually do have conversations with my inner Nina, with my inner teen, internally, and sometimes out loud, you know, when I can tell her, you're safe, you know, and I'll do this and I'll pat and I'll say, it's okay, you know, I'm here. And so the inner teen is just an extension of the inner child, but we still want to be able to provide that soothing and that reconnection to safety.
And we all know that's important because those of us who are raising teenagers, we know that they still need the soothing, even though they're demanding the independence, that, you know, it's a balance there. It's a balance act. Want to remind people, if you would like to, put your comments or questions in the comment section and we'll address them because we're a little more than halfway through and we want to make sure we hear from you if that's what you want. Leslie, why is this important, especially in the context of being a parent or adult raising a teen?
Why is this important? Oh my gosh, it's like the most important thing. And I always say like Latinx parenting has two legs. One of them is the parenting and one of them is the reparenting. And if you don't have one and you only have the other, then you're going to fall over because, you know, we really need this reparenting aspect because this is where we build continued resilience. You know, this is where we build continued awareness of what our needs are. This is where we build continued connection to those around us because we no longer take their behaviors personally, right? And so that's one of the things that comes up a lot with parents who have teenagers is that a lot of these activations happen and we take a lot of those behaviors personally without recognizing what purpose they actually serve for our teen. Right. And so when we can differentiate, this is coming up for me because of something that I experienced, or this is coming up for me that is triggering to me and that is causing this negative emotion or this confusion or whatever that feeling is. And we can say that is one part of it. And what my teen is experiencing is something else, right? They're not actively trying to make me mad. They're not actively trying to, you know, be annoying to me. And so sometimes they are, but also that is serving a need for them, right? There's something going on there. And so when we can take ownership and really take, you know, that journey into our own hands, we can more easily distinguish what is coming from us and what is truly coming from our children and from our teens and what that need might be, right? Without necessarily projecting and attaching our own experiences to it.
That's wonderful. I love what you said. I had one of my teenage sons once said to me, I can't even remember the incident, but I do remember his response was, "I'm not trying to annoy you. It's just a happy consequence." Yeah. Like, oh, really, kid? Um, you mentioned that you run reparenting workshops, and you have a client load, an audience that comes to you. What are you seeing when people come to you, especially when they're interested in the reparenting?
Yeah, so the majority of the people that come into the Latinx parenting space do identify as Latinx or Chicanx or some kind of root, having some kind of roots in Latin America. And so a lot of what we do is to give context for the reparenting process within the context of culture. And so because so many of our parents, a lot of us, who grew up with single moms, we watched a lot of stress in the adult world, right? We watched a lot of struggle. And so much of that has to do with what our parents experience historically, right? What our grandparents experience. And so I don't know if you've seen Encanto, but like we could really get into like all of that applies here also. But I really think that when we start to give culture the weight that it deserves, that we can start to think about how systems and institutions and historical situations happen that then impacted the way that we were raised, right? And so a lot of the work that we do in the reparenting is to not forget about that. It's actually not a personal process. This is a collective process, right? And so I mentioned community before. We need community around these things because otherwise, if we do it in isolation, it can be really easy to get lost or confused or forget the language around reparenting, right? And so one of the biggest things that I find is people trying to find their voice, people trying to really understand what it is that they want for themselves, not what it is that their culture or their family or the community around them wanted for them as a child, right? So a lot of us had this idea that in order to be happy, you have to grow up, you have to go to college, you have to find a partner, you have to get married, have a certain amount of children. Like there's all of these expectations and they vary by gender, especially in Latinx culture. And so much of the reparenting process has to do with rediscovering ourselves and thinking about what is it actually that I want to do? What is it that I feel fulfilled doing? Does this work for me? Does this idea that, marriage and the happy home, like, is that something that I truly want, or is that something that was prescribed to me, that I followed, and now I'm finding myself in ruts? And so, again, like have found it a very liberating process to be able to identify, the reasons for which I've ended up where I am, but also start to really choose, like how I want my life to be. And that's a model that I want to give my children. I want my children to be able to choose with as much information as they have about the different possibilities and the different life paths that they could take. And so once I give that autonomy to them, because they are sovereign individuals, they're really meant here to unfold in ways that maybe we don't necessarily not want them to unfold, but expect, right? We as parents have all of these ideas about how things should be also. And so it really gives us an opportunity to check ourselves and to think about how we are projecting those ideals still onto our children. But again, the work is internal, right? We don't necessarily want to place our value on how we're raising our children. We want to place our value in ourselves. And then by that mode, our children are also learning how to value themselves.
Absolutely. We have a question. Jane says, what was the name of the book you mentioned? Please, for Dan Siegel.
Gosh, I'm like, what was the name? That's like the hardest question I've gotten. What book did I mention?
I think it's Dan Siegel. I'm pretty sure.
Oh, yes. I mentioned Brainstorm by Dan Siegel. So that is specifically, and actually he wrote that book for parents and teens to read together. So that was Dan Siegel's Brainstorm. But the first book that I ever read that was a parenting book was when I was still pregnant with my child, with my first 11 years ago. And that book was also by Dan Siegel, and it was called Parenting from the Inside Out. And so I don't know, if you are a big parenting book buff and if you have teens, it's not too late to read this particular book. I think Brainstorm is wonderful, but I feel like when we talk about the parts of ourselves that still need healing, the parts of ourselves that get activated as a result of having adverse childhoods, that book is really, really key to kind of understanding what's happening, not just at a personal level, but also at a neurological and biological level.
The link to that book, Jane, is in our comment section. So feel free to go scroll down and then you can click on it and you'll have access to the book or access to purchasing the book. We are coming to the end of our time. I want you to think about if the people listening or artists listening only remembers one thing, one takeaway, what it would be. And I'm going to commiserate because I know there are other people out there who really would love to touch this cultural aspect that you touched upon, that, you know, we should be giving culture the weight it deserves when we're talking about reparenting and parenting. I would love to have another conversation about it because culture, and it spans everyone. We're all a part of some culture or the other.
Right.
Often when you're of an immigrant culture, your definition of it is a memory, a stagnant memory. And the culture is growing and changing back home.
Mm-hmm.
And it's okay for it to grow and change abroad. But in order to really feel that we're of it, we have this permanent fixed image of our culture. And we bring that with us and we put it upon our children. And there's, you know, a domino effect.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it goes back to the Encanto, right? Like, I don't know, I'm not sure if you saw it, but she's like the grandmother is very protective of what she has built in order for her family to survive, you know, and I really, really recommend it to you, to anybody that's watching. If you haven't watched it already, you're going to need tissues, but it's protection, right? Like, we have experienced so much, like me coming from an immigrant mother and an immigrant father, there was this need and this want to protect, right? To really keep us safe. And so sometimes that need that we have to keep our family safe can really, you know, create situations where we don't feel safe, right? So my mom might be parenting me with a lot of fear-based practices, or she might be yelling at me because I got home a little bit later, but that is from a place of wanting to keep me safe, you know. But the mode that she's communicating that may actually cause rupture and disconnection and further, you know, removal from those cultural values. And so that's kind of what I experienced as a teen, is like, I don't want anything to do with this. You know, that feels violent to me. There was a lot of pain, a lot of harm that happened in my own childhood, but also just seeing my family, my extended family. And I was like, I don't want that, you know. And so becoming a parent has made me, again, just recognize the ways that I do want to choose my culture in ways that feel good to me and in ways that would feel good to my child. And so to your question of, you know, what would I want people to really come away with from this conversation, it's always twofold for me. You know, they're equally as important. One of them is to have so much patience with this process. And I know that it's really hard, but there has been so many times where I feel like, wait a minute, I thought I healed this wound already. Like, I thought I already processed this. I already had a session with my therapist about this. And here I am again, 2 years later, dealing with the same thing. And so because we have so much, especially those of us that come from lineages where there was a lot of harm, where there was a lot of historical and ancestral trauma, this is going to take more than one generation. You know, this is going to take a few generations. And so this process is lifelong, and you cannot do it without community. And so that's the second part of it, is that we have to find community around every challenge, but the reparenting especially, because if we are not able to sometimes offer ourselves compassion, then we need other people to remind us of what is true. And what is true is grace, and what is true is compassion. And so if we have other people in our lives that are able to be like, hey, you know, I don't like the way and I'll do this to my friends all the time. Like, I don't like the way you're talking to my friend right now, you know, and they're talking about like, oh my gosh, I'm so stupid. Like, I did this. And I'm just like, I don't like that you're calling my friend stupid. I don't like that. You know, where does that come from? Because we need to not do that anymore.
I love that. That's wonderful. I don't like how you're talking to my friend. We are at the end of our time. Thank you so much, Leslie. I appreciate you being here and taking the time to be with us this morning for you.
Thank you, Kamira. I appreciate you so much. This was fun. Let's do it again.
Let's do it again. Now, I want to remind our audience, we are here again tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. tomorrow, Wednesday. We have Coffee with Jen and Sharon, where they're dishing out all the goods about raising teens. So bring your hot beverage and have coffee with Jen and Sharon, 10:30 a.m. Eastern time, same location. Thanks a bunch.
Thank you.
You're welcome.